A grim task for emergency crews in Kyiv just hours after a new salvo of Russian strikes hit the city. Officials are saying that at least 13 people were killed and that more than 85 others were injured. And the damage, it has been reported at more than 30 locations across Ukraine's capital city. Right now it's mid-morning there and rescue crews are out in full force. Officials say that a number of residential buildings took direct hits. Right now, emergency crews they're going through the rubble, trying to recover the remains of the victims. President Volodymyr Zelensky, he had warned that there were indications that Russia was preparing for a massive strike. And it comes after a series of Ukrainian drone attacks deep inside Russia in recent weeks. Ivan Watson is following developments from Hong Kong and joins me live. Ivan, so what do we know about what led up to this? Our understanding was that Ukraine's president had intelligence that this was likely coming?
That's right. And Volodymyr Zelensky had, in fact, warned residents of Kyiv to heed the air raid sirens and to treat this seriously. So you actually had large numbers of residents who had taken to the subway stations that have served as air raid shelters for much of the last more than 4 years since Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, that they had taken those precautions. And yet, despite that, the ferocity of this bombardment has claimed lives. The emergency workers, as we speak, are still digging through the rubble of buildings, trying to search for victims. According to the mayor of Kyiv, that's Vitaly Klitschko, he says at least 13 people have been killed, more than 80 people wounded. Among those missing is a 15-year-old girl and her family. The Russian Defense Ministry has claimed responsibility for this attack. They say that this was a, quote, massive strike using high-precision, long-range weapons, including drones, that not only targeted Kyiv, but also other regions of Ukraine, including Dnipropetrovsk, Poltava, Cherkasy, and Chernihiv, and that in Kyiv, that they were targeting things like factories that they claim were manufacturing parts for things like the Ukrainian Flamingo missiles, or storage facilities for drones, or industrial areas that were used to create parts for things like drones and missiles. The Ukrainian government is saying there were residential buildings that suffered direct impacts and have contributed to the growing loss of life as a result of this deadly night. At least 11 hours the bombardment continued. That's according to eyewitnesses. So a deadly night in what has been an escalating long-range aerial war between Ukraine and Russia that has escalated in just recent weeks, really, Polo.
So what's happening on the ground right now? Let's go live to Kyiv. We're joined by Peter Zalmayev. He's the director of Eurasia Democracy Initiative. Just bring us up to speed on the situation on the ground, what you perhaps remember hearing, and if any people are still sheltering in place after those overnight strikes.
Well, the number of the fatalities is, of course, growing. Now we're talking about 13 people. And I think what's once again, I think needs to be pointed out is that most of the, if not all of the targets are civilian. Over 30 buildings targeted, some of them partly, some of them fully destroyed. And that is the main difference. When we're talking about Ukrainian strikes deep into Russian territory, Ukraine is targeting fuel supply, roads and fuel supply, logistics, etc. That directly feeds the Putin's fighting machine in Ukraine, whereas Putin is simply indiscriminately, once again, bombing the capital of Ukraine. He finds himself actually in a hard place. As the Russians are grumbling, the fuel crisis has gripped all of Russia. People are unhappy, and Putin needs to show them something. He has ruled out ending this war anytime soon. So gesture of vengeance to try to placate his base.
So based on what you say there, Peter, do you suspect clearly that this is likely some sort of revenge after he has been under some tremendous pressure to do something after experiencing that what has really been this escalated campaign against targets in Moscow from Ukraine?
Indeed. Indeed, and many have taken to comparing what's happening between Russia and Ukraine now to the so-called war of cities between Iran and Iraq back in the 1980s. It is a retaliatory spiral, and once again, Vladimir Putin has made a calculation that ending this war now, especially that Vladimir Zelensky of Ukraine is essentially giving him ultimatums, a 40-day ultimatum to finish this war or else. Vladimir Putin is not going to negotiate under these conditions, of course. He needs to continue projecting strength. And if the Crimean Peninsula becomes an island completely cut off from motherland Russia, from the rest of Russia, so be it. I think Vladimir Putin is willing to stomach all sorts of destruction and misery in Russia as long as he continues to be seen as pursuing his goal of essentially bringing Ukraine to its knees.
And as you were speaking, we were seeing some of those images from Ukraine's state emergency service where they're pulling out people from the rubble. As you mentioned at the top, that a death toll does continue to rise. So what do you think comes next when it comes to President Zelensky? How does he in turn respond to what is widely believed to be the targeting of these residential areas?
Well, I think Ukraine's paramount task is to make Ukrainian cities livable. And of course, it's a new normal for Ukrainians. They're hardened after 4.5 years of this madness. But still, Vladimir Putin, I think, is really banking on thousands and hundreds of thousands of Kievans and residents of other cities leaving, making them economically unviable, and in fact increasing the refugee crisis in Europe, inundating Europe with more of its refugees, straining their welfare systems. So it's like a multi-pronged strategy for Vladimir Putin. Ukraine needs to defend its cities from the air, and that explains Sybiga, our foreign minister's appeal to the Europeans, to the Americans: help us with Patriot missiles, help us with air defenses. We need to defend the cities. Otherwise, this is going to be very hard. And Putin, once again, is hoping to try again this coming winter to completely cast Kiev into cold and darkness.
I'm joined now by Orysia Lutsevich. She is the head of the Ukraine Forum at Chatham House and joins us now live. Thank you very much for joining us here on the program. As reported, Russia has attacked Ukraine's capital. Tell us, what is the strategic logic of these strikes, especially in light of Ukraine's long-range drone attacks on Moscow?
So you're seeing basically the fact that Putin is failing to achieve any of his objectives in territorial terms, to retake all of these lands that he claims in the Russian constitution belong, even less the leftovers of Donbas region. And he is basically on the revenge mission against Ukrainian civilians to break the will to resist, to make life hell in Ukrainian cities. And we're seeing these attacks, continuous attacks, with more than 500 drones overnight to basically bombard cities. On the other hand, Ukraine is practicing quite a sophisticated mid and long-range precision strikes to take out the blood of Russian war economy, which is, of course, energy and fuel. And it has attacked 8 out of 10 largest refineries to incapacitate, damage them consistently from actually October of 2025. Now it is intensified.
And Orysia, let's discuss what triggered what you call Putin's revenge mission. Let's focus in on Ukraine's mission, Ukraine's refinery-focused drone campaign. What does Ukraine achieve with this battlefield strategy?
Ukraine has surprisingly achieved quite a lot if we consider that Russia is the largest producer and exporter of oil. It has an enormous system of refining and transit from land and sea routes. So as a result of these sophisticated drone attacks, Ukraine has taken about 20% of oil refining capacity of Russia. And it's because the equipment to run these stations is expensive. It's not easy to repair, but also it comes from the West, where there are sanctions imposed to limit Russia's access to any equipment related to energy sector. So this consistent attack led to shortages in many Russian regions of fuel. We already see rationing of how much civilians can purchase. They can't have canisters to fill in to store home, but also this will impact the army, first of all, and this is the goal. The gasoline that is used for armored vehicles and all kinds of vehicles, the production of it dropped 25%. So much this is the problem that for the first time, Russia will have to import some of it from sea. So it's in talk with Kazakhstan and India to actually repurchase in India's processed Russian oil that it's refining back into Russia.
And we've seen such, vivid depictions of this rationing. We've seen lines and lines of Russian drivers waiting for petrol in Russian cities, along with the images of blown up Russian refineries. What has all this done to Russia's so-called energy superpower status?
Why? Clearly, it has damaged it to a large degree, and also something that Russian population could probably have not imagined. They have the flashbacks to the 90s when Soviet Union was collapsing and there was deficit of everything. So it's a strange, harbinger possibly of what awaits Russia, and people perfectly understand it. Putin will try to put up a brave show and will try to find alternative sources for this energy. But the question is whether he will have to pay hard currency for this, to which he's also running out because his war chest is drying up. We see Russia runs a huge budget deficit, more than it has expected. So all of this creates really a crunch time for Russia. And especially, let's recall that there will be so-called sham Duma elections, where one way or the other, Putin will have to show up the brave face, telling how this war is going in his favor, which obviously the Russian citizens perfectly understand it is not.
This is, as you put it, crunch time for Russia and for Putin. But is there a danger that Russia's fuel crisis actually could rally the public around the Kremlin instead of turning them against it?
There's always a risk of that, and the nation under any attack is rallying around the flag. There are two questions. One, how long they can sustain this rally, and as I've said, the Ukrainian strikes on Russia, when Russian population started feeling it, is now lasting more than a year and a half. And furthermore, it's attacking Moscow, the heartland of Russia. And also, let's remember, in Russia, it's the economic elite, it's a security elite that also has a huge influence. And if they see things happening, especially in Crimea, somewhere where the fuel shortages are the worst, because it's a peninsula, it relies heavily on everything provided from mainland. The fear is that if Ukraine manages to choke off Crimea, there may be a real panic in the elites whether Russia will be able to sustain this, war treasure as where it's started the war against Ukraine back in 2014 with the annexation of Crimea. And if there is a risk of losing this prize, there will be more pressure either to consider, a certain removal of Putin or a serious negotiation with Ukraine to avoid a humiliating defeat.